know your place today? Don't say you're his sister. It's embarrassing." My dad hissed the words through his teeth. His voice carried no volume, but it cut with the precision of a surgical scalpel. His hand, the one wearing that flashy, overpriced Rolex, clamped down on my elbow, fingers digging into the nerve. He shoved me sideways away from the brilliant crystal lights of the main hall, past the polished oak archway, and toward a tiny, wretched table crammed in the shadows next to the catering staff's entrance. I stepped back. The low heel of my shoe struck the oak floor with a dry, hollow thud. My dad released my arm, adjusted the lapels of his custom-tailored suit, and his narcissistic face melted into a dignified, practiced smile. He was already turning his back, already preparing to greet his future in-laws, the federal judges. To him, I was a stain. A defective piece of the Martin family legacy that had to be hidden to protect his paper-thin facade. I sat down in that dark corner, isolated, silent. The clinking of champagne glasses and the waves of fake laughter rolling from the center VIP table washed over me like noise from another planet. Until the most powerful federal judge in the room strolled past the shadows. He turned his head, our eyes locked. The champagne flute in his hand tilted dangerously. He froze, staring at me as if witnessing the impossible, and gasped, "Ma'am, we didn't expect to see you here. Before I tell you what happened, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story hits close to home. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there?" Right now, I sat in that dark corner, my back pressed flat against the wall, a habit from years of operating in hostile environments. From this angle, I had a clean line of sight to the center of the Union Harbor Club's grand ballroom. And what I saw made my stomach turn. My dad stood at the main table, his spine curled into a fawning hunch. He was reaching across two place settings to straighten the pocket square on my brother Daniel's suit jacket. Daniel held still, chin raised, letting the old man groom him like a show pony before a dressage competition. He flashed his perfect veneered grin at a passing guest. The successful young businessman. The heir to the Martin bloodline. The bloodline was a lie, the success was borrowed. And that pocket square cost more than my first month's rent after boot camp. I knew the architecture of this performance because I had watched it being built brick by fake brick for over 3 decades. My dad never cared about character. He never asked what kind of person you were. He only cared about 2 metrics: the size of your bank account and how convincingly you could act out a script for high society. Daniel scored perfectly on both. He had the suit, the posture, the rehearsed laugh, and our father's undying devotion. I had a set of dog tags and a permanent seat in the kitchen. That kitchen. I can still smell the pine sol and the leftover grease from the roasting pan. I was 23 years old. I had just come home from my first deployment, 14 months in a combat zone, commanding a logistics platoon of 42 soldiers through 3 separate convoy ambushes. I walked through the front door of my parents' house in my dress uniform. Ribbons, unit citation, the whole display. My dad took one look at me and his face went gray. His golf buddies were sitting in the living room, 3 men in pastel polos holding single malt scotch. My dad grabbed my shoulder before I cleared the hallway and steered me into the kitchen. He shut the door behind me. Through the wood, I heard him laugh and say, "Just the cleaning lady dropping something off." He left me standing there in full military dress next to a sink full of dirty dishes. I stayed in that kitchen for 45 minutes. I heard every word of their conversation, the golf handicaps, the stock tips, the jokes about their kids' Ivy League admissions. My dad bragged about Daniel's new internship at a consulting firm. He never said my name, not once. That was the day I understood my designation in this family. Daniel was the masterpiece. I was the impulse, the low-class mistake, the daughter who chose the military over a high-paying desk job and by doing so committed the unforgivable sin of failing to be useful as a social prop. The pattern never changed. It only deepened. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every family gathering, Daniel sat at the head of the table, holding court about his latest deal, his latest vacation, his latest girlfriend from the right zip code. I sat in the chair closest to the door, already planning my exit. When my dad introduced his children to guests, he would put his hand on Daniel's shoulder and say, "This is my son Daniel. He's in consulting, Harvard Business School, you know." Then he would gesture vaguely in my direction, the way you point at a coat rack in the corner, and mutter, "And that's Brenda. She's away a lot." Away. That was his word for 14-month combat deployments. Away. The same word you use when a neighbor's dog goes missing. I earned my first commendation at 25, a meritorious service medal for coordinating the emergency evacuation of a forward operating base under active mortar fire. My commanding officer called my parents' house to deliver the news personally. My dad answered the phone, listened for 30 seconds, and said, "Thank you for calling the way you'd thank a telemarketer before hanging up." He never mentioned it to me. He never mentioned it to anyone. But 2 weeks later, he threw a party at the house to celebrate Daniel passing the bar exam on his third attempt. Third attempt, champagne, catered dinner. 40 guests. I found out about it through a Facebook photo that Daniel's girlfriend posted. I was stationed in Kuwait at the time running supply convoys through contested territory, and my family was popping champagne corks for a man who needed 3 tries to pass a standardized test. I watched Daniel now across the ballroom clinking glasses with a silver-haired couple. He had no idea. None of them did. My hazard pay combat bonuses and 12 years of aggressive investment portfolios had built a net worth that dwarfed my father's highly leveraged foam castle estate. The commendations filling my service record, the Department of Defense reports I had authored the tactical evaluations that bore my signature. The medals locked in a fireproof safe in my apartment, none of it existed in their world. I never shouted about my victories. I never corrected my father's lies. I let him believe his own narrative because correcting a narcissist is like arguing with a wall that thinks it's a cathedral. I shifted my gaze from the crowd back to my own arm. The skin where my dad had grabbed me was already flushing pink, the pressure points throbbing with a dull, familiar ache. In the field, the enemy shoots you in the chest. You see it coming. You can brace for it. Family operates differently. Family smiles at you, pours you a glass of water, waits for you to turn around, and then drives the knife of their narcissism directly into your spine. I press 2 fingers against my wrist. Pulse steady. 64 beats per minute. I locked my emotions behind a steel door, the same way I secured classified documents at the end of a shift. Airtight, no leaks. The ache in my elbow pulsed once more, and a memory I did not invite forced its way through the door. 3 days before this party, I was sitting at my steel desk on base, reviewing a troop deployment roster under the harsh fluorescent lights. The tubes above me buzzed with that constant low-frequency hum that drills into your skull after enough years. My phone vibrated against the metal surface, a sharp, short rattle. I flipped it over, a text from my dad. No greeting, no "How are you?" No acknowledgement that it had been 11 months since we last spoke, just a cold, calculated order. I read the words on the screen. Don't bring your crude military demeanor to tarnish the party. Best if you keep quiet, sit at the back auxiliary table, and absolutely do not say you are Daniel's sister. Don't ruin this family's effort. Every word landed like a hollow point round striking my ribs. I set the phone down on the desk. I pressed my palms flat against the cold steel surface and held them there, letting the chill bite into my skin. I counted to 10. Standard breath control. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The rational part of my brain, the intelligence officer, the tactical analyst, screamed at me to delete the message and block the number. The mission was compromised before it began. The operating environment was hostile. The commanding officer, my own father, had designated me as a liability. Standard operating procedure, withdraw. But I didn't smash the phone against the cinder block wall. I didn't delete the message. I operated on discipline, and discipline is a leash that works both ways. A soldier does not run from a battlefield. And buried somewhere beneath 14 years of military conditioning under the Kevlar and the calluses and the classified clearances, there was still a daughter who harbored a ridiculous, naive hope. The hope that showing up, stepping back, and letting my brother shine might awaken some dormant loyalty in the man who was supposed to be my father. I accepted the mission with the mindset of a supportive sister walking into a war zone she knew she wouldn't survive unscathed. The night before the party, I stood in front of my closet in the small apartment off base. The dress uniform hung on the left side, pressed starched heavy with ribbons and service medals. The silver oak leaf cluster I was in line for sat in a velvet case on the shelf above. I reached for the uniform. My fingers touched the wool blend. I held it for 3 full seconds. Then, I let go. I selected a minimalist black dress from the right side of the closet. Sharp tailoring, simple lines, low heels. No jewelry except a plain wristwatch. I ran my thumb across the plain face of the wristwatch before strapping it on. It was a Casio $42 at the PX. It had survived 2 deployments, a sandstorm that ate through a Humvee windshield, and a river crossing in Helmand Province that submerged it for 16 minutes. It still kept perfect time. $42. My father's Rolex cost $8,000 and he'd had it repaired twice in the last year because it couldn't handle a golf swing. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The black dress made me look smaller, quieter, forgettable. That was the point. I was deploying behind enemy lines, and in enemy territory, you don't wear your colors. You don't announce your presence. You move through the shadows, gather intelligence, complete the objective, and extract. My father had given me explicit orders: be invisible. I was going to follow those orders to the letter, not out of obedience, but because the best camouflage in a room full of frauds is the appearance of insignificance. I chose to leave every marker of my rank, my service, and my value hanging in that closet. I was going to give my father exactly what he demanded: a ghost at the back table. A silent, invisible prop. The kind of daughter he could pretend didn't exist. I pulled the apartment door shut behind me and tested the deadbolt. The lock engaged with a solid mechanical click. I walked to my car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic, paid off in full, maintained according to schedule. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot. The base lights faded in the rearview mirror. The civilian world opened up in front of me, full of strip malls and chain restaurants and people who had never had to choose between a Kevlar vest and a cocktail dress. I folded the text message into my memory like a classified briefing, stored it, filed it. I would need it later. I was not sitting at that dark table alone. To my left sat Colonel Diane Mercer, retired. She wore a dark trench coat over a simple navy dress, her silver hair pinned back in a tight knot. Her eyes, sharp gray, unblinking, scanned the opulent room of the Union Harbor Club the way she used to scan a grid square in the Middle East. Systematically, patiently, cataloging threats. She was the woman who pulled me out of a collapsed structure in Fallujah. I remember the taste of concrete dust in my mouth and the weight of a fractured ceiling beam pinning my chest to the ground. The sound of my own breathing inside my helmet, ragged, shallow, the breath of a person running out of air. Then her hands appeared. Scarred, calloused, impossibly strong, gripping the drag handle on my body armor and hauling me backward through 6 feet of pulverized concrete while mortar rounds walked toward our position in 40-meter intervals. Each detonation shook the ground hard enough to rattle my teeth. She didn't stop. She didn't slow down. She dislocated her own shoulder on the final pull, popping the joint clean out of its socket as she wrenched me free from a rebar snag. When the medic rushed over and tried to treat her, she looked at him with those flat gray eyes and said, "Splint it, get back to work." He splinted it. She finished the evacuation with one functioning arm. That was the moment I understood what family actually meant. Not blood, not a last name on a mailbox, not a man in a tailored suit deciding which of his children deserved to be seen in public. Family is the person who bleeds for you when they don't have to. Family is the colonel who dislocates her shoulder to drag a junior officer out of the kill zone, then tells the medic she's fine. When I called Mercer 3 days ago and told her about the party and the text message, she didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for details. She didn't weigh the social implications. She said 4 words. "I'll be there." She drove 90 minutes from her cabin in the Poconos. She pressed her only formal dress. She polished her shoes, the same shoes she had worn to 3 military funerals and 1 Medal of Honor ceremony. She showed up because that's what real family does. They show up. They don't send text messages with conditions and dress codes. I recalled the moment we walked through the front doors of the club earlier that evening. My dad materialized within seconds, blocking our path in the marble foyer. He audited my black dress from collar to hem, and his chest deflated with visible relief. I looked plain enough. Invisible enough. Then his eyes moved to Mercer. I introduced her by her rank, Colonel Diane Mercer, retired. He rolled his eyes. A full theatrical roll, the kind a teenager throws at a parent. He dismissed the title the way you'd dismiss a waiter who brought the wrong wine. His chin lifted. He looked through her as if she were made of smoke. The arrogance of a frog sitting at the bottom of a well, convinced its small circle of sky is the entire universe. Then came the cold nod. Then came the grip on my elbow. The shove. The exile to the shadow table. Mercer watched every second of it. She didn't intervene. She didn't raise her voice. She stood still, tracking my father's exact movements with the calm, predatory patience of a woman who had spent 30 years commanding soldiers in combat. She understood a fundamental truth that my father never would. Letting a fool commit his forces to a terrible strategy is the fastest way to guarantee his defeat. Now at the table, Mercer lifted a glass of ice water. She took a slow, deliberate sip. The ice shifted and clinked against the glass. She set it down precisely on the coaster and turned her head toward me. Her voice came out low, razor-edged, meant only for my ears. Enemies always leave an opening when they think we are completely harmless. I nodded once. One short dip of the chin. I pressed 2 fingers to my wrist again. 60 beats per minute. 0 anger. 0 self-pity. My emotions were sealed in a vault buried under years of operational discipline. I was not a victim sitting in a dark corner. I was an observer. And the target was performing beautifully. From my wretched corner next to the kitchen doors, the tactical view was perfect. I watched my dad at the center table. His back was hunched forward, his hands clasped together in a tight, fawning grip, the posture of a man begging for approval from someone he considered his superior. Judge Benjamin Carter sat directly across from him, and my father's entire body angled toward the man like a sunflower, tracking the only source of light in a dark room. Carter said something. My dad threw his head back and laughed too loud, too long, the kind of forced bray that echoes off the ceiling and makes everyone within earshot cringe. Daniel stood next to him, one hand in his pocket, the other swirling a glass of bourbon he was too young to appreciate. He played the part of the refined heir, nodding at things he didn't understand, smiling at people he couldn't name. A waiter rushed past my table carrying a tray of dirty champagne flutes. His hip caught the edge of my chair and jolted my water glass. It skidded across the white tablecloth, leaving a wet trail. He didn't stop. He didn't apologize. He didn't even see me. I was part of the furniture in this corner, as invisible as the ice buckets and the bread baskets stacked against the wall behind me. I steadied the glass with 2 fingers and set it back in place. Mercer's eyes tracked the waiter, then returned to the main table. She said nothing. She didn't need to. I took a slow breath. The cold draft from the swinging kitchen doors hit my bare shoulders every time a staff member pushed through. The air carried the smell of reheated butter sauce and industrial dish soap. 10 feet away in the golden light of the ballroom, my family was selling their humanity to buy relevance from the Carter family. They looked like clowns performing in a minefield, too busy juggling to notice the ground shifting beneath their feet. My dad's performance escalated. He leaned across the table to top off Judge Carter's champagne glass himself, bypassing the waiter entirely. He held the bottle with both hands, angling it carefully, pouring with the reverent concentration of a sommelier, a man who, to my certain knowledge, drank nothing fancier than domestic beer at home and had once pronounced Cabernet Sauvignon as Cabinet Sauvignon in front of dinner guests. Carter accepted the pour without comment. My dad set the bottle down and launched into another story, his hands painting broad theatrical gestures in the air. From 30 feet away, I could see his mouth forming the shapes of words like legacy and tradition, words he had never used at the kitchen table, words he had learned from the country club brochure, the way a parrot learns phrases from repetition rather than comprehension. Then he pulled out Judge Carter's chair when the older man briefly stood to greet another guest. He actually pulled out the chair and held it, his body bent at the waist, in a bow so deep it bordered on genuflection. Carter sat back down without acknowledging the gesture. My dad straightened up, smoothed his tie, and beamed as if he had just been knighted. Daniel played his own role with equal desperation. He positioned himself next to Emily Carter, the fiancée, the prize, the passport to the Carter family fortune, and kept one hand on the small of her back, a gesture of performative intimacy that he had clearly rehearsed. He laughed at her father's jokes a half-second too quickly. He agreed with opinions before they were fully formed. He nodded with the eager bobbing motion of a dashboard ornament. At one point, Emily shifted slightly away from his touch. It was a micro-movement, maybe 2 inches, but I caught it from across the room. Her shoulder rotated forward, creating a thin barrier of air between her body and Daniel's palm. He didn't notice. He was too busy performing for the audience to read the stage directions. Daniel caught his father's eye and gave a small conspiratorial nod, the silent agreement between 2 con artists that the marks were buying the act. My jaw tightened. 1 millimeter, then it released. I breathed through it. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Judge Carter separated from the main group. He held a fresh flute of champagne and began walking the perimeter of the room, greeting peripheral guests with the measured, unhurried authority of a man who had controlled federal courtrooms for decades. He shook hands firmly. He listened more than he spoke. He moved through the crowd the way a general moves through a forward operating base, aware of every face, every angle, every exit. At the center table, my dad bit his lower lip. His fingers drummed against his thigh. He was restraining himself from following the judge across the room like a lost dog chasing a car. Daniel leaned over and whispered something in his ear. My dad's hand stopped drumming. He straightened his cufflinks instead, pretending to be occupied. Carter stepped away from the bright lights. He walked toward the service corridor. The dim hallway lighting caught the edge of my face. I did not look away. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly still, my posture locked at 90 degrees, my hands resting flat on the tablecloth. The muscle memory of 14 years of attention drills held my spine like a steel rod. The judge's eyes swept the dim corridor. They passed the ice station. They passed the stacked bread baskets, so they landed on me. His stride broke, his left foot hesitated mid-step. The champagne in his flute sloshed gently. He blinked twice, rapid and voluntary, as if recalibrating what his eyes were telling his brain. The collision was 4 seconds away. Carter froze. His champagne flute tilted dangerously, a thin stream of liquid kissing the rim. His eyes locked onto my face with the intensity of a man recognizing a ghost. The color drained from the casual warmth of his expression and was replaced by something harder, stunned recognition. He set the glass down on an empty waiter's tray without looking at it. His posture snapped from relaxed socialization to rigid absolute respect in the span of a single heartbeat. "Ma'am, we didn't expect to see you here." His voice carried across the silent corridor and bled into the edge of the ballroom. 3 guests near the service entrance turned their heads. I was already on my feet. Muscle memory seized control of my body before conscious thought could intervene. My spine straightened into the steel rod posture of a soldier standing at attention. My chin leveled, my shoulders squared. 14 years of drilling snapped every joint and muscle into alignment with a precision that civilian life could never replicate. I extended my hand. My grip was firm, dry, and measured. "The honor is mine, Judge Carter. It's good to see you outside the briefing room." Carter's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, the kind of smile that remade the entire geography of his face. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. His voice boomed now, carrying across the ballroom floor with the resonance of a man used to silencing courtrooms. "Major Brenda Martins, a good lord, this is an unimaginable honor." The room shifted. The ambient noise, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations. The soft jazz from the string quartet seemed to drop in volume, as if someone had turned a dial. Heads pivoted. Necks craned. The name, Major, cut through the cocktail chatter like a blade through silk. At the center table, my dad froze with a glass of scotch halfway to his mouth. The liquid sloshed against the side, a single amber drop cresting the rim and landing on the white tablecloth. He didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the scene in the corridor, on the Federal Judge of the United States, standing at attention before the daughter he had just shoved into the dark. I watched the realization hit him in stages like a row of dominoes falling in slow motion. First the confusion, his brow furrowing, his head tilting slightly. The universal expression of a brain receiving data it cannot process. Then the recognition, his jaw slackening, his nostrils flaring, the scotch glass lowering to the table with a clumsy thud that splashed amber liquid across his fingers. Finally, the terror, a full body flinch, his spine straightening so fast it looked like he had been electrocuted, his napkin scrubbing frantically at his wet hand. Daniel's face turned the color of wet cement, that gray bloodless shade that appears when the body redirects all available blood supply to the organs, because the brain has just registered a catastrophic threat. Emily Carter glanced at Daniel. He didn't see her. He was staring at the corridor with the blank, paralyzed expression of a man watching his house burn from the inside out. My dad shoved his chair back. The legs screeched against the floor. He sprinted toward us, his Italian leather shoes skidding on the polished oak. He nearly tripped on the leg of a neighboring chair, catching himself on a guest's shoulder without apologizing. Daniel followed 3 steps behind, his bourbon abandoned on the table, his rehearsed smile dissolving like sugar in acid. My dad arrived in front of us, gasping for air. His chest heaved. A bead of sweat crawled down his temple and disappeared into his collar. He looked at me, a quick, panicked glance, then at the judge. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. He stuttered out the words like a man choking on a fishbone. "Your Honor, you know, her..." Carter turned slowly. The warm, respectful smile that had greeted me vanished from his face. It was replaced by something I had seen only in classified briefing rooms, the cold, measured gaze of a man who has spent decades separating truth from lies and who has just identified a liar. His eyes moved from my father's sweating forehead to the dark corner where my table sat jammed against the kitchen entrance, then back to my father's face. The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. It felt like 4 hours. Have you ever watched someone who treated you like garbage suddenly realize that the person they are trying to impress actually respects you? If you've ever experienced the sweet vindication of karma doing your dirty work, hit the like button and tell me your story in the comments. The destruction of my father's ego is just getting started. Carter stared down my father. The judge stood a full 2 inches taller, but the difference felt like a canyon. He kept his voice level, the same steady calibrated tone he used from the federal bench, but the words landed like hammer blows on an anvil. He placed one hand on my shoulder. The weight was deliberate, proprietary, the gesture of a man publicly claiming an asset that had been criminally mishandled by its custodians. This woman's logistics strategy report is mandatory reading in my judicial office in Washington. He turned to face my father, fully, his voice gaining mass with every syllable. Her threat assessment protocols reshaped our entire emergency evacuation framework at the Pentagon 18 months ago. I have called her work indispensable because it is. Daniel swallowed hard. The sound was audible, a thick, sickening gulp that I heard from 3 feet away. The invisible grenade had detonated. The shrapnel was still traveling. Carter's gaze shifted. He looked past my father's shoulder, past the gleaming center table, past the crystal chandeliers, and fixed on the dark, cramped space where I'd been sitting. The folding table, the kitchen doors, the stacked ice buckets. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck corded. He turned back to my father, and his voice dropped into a lower register, the register he reserved for sentencing. Mr. Martin, why is a senior officer of the United States Army, and more importantly, my future son-in-law's biological sister seated in this wretched corner? The question detonated in the space between them. My father's face cycled through 3 colors in 2 seconds, red to white to a mottled, splotchy gray. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The Rolex caught the light and flashed. His mouth worked silently for a beat, jaw moving without sound, the way a fish thrashes on dry land. Then he doubled down. Instead of admitting the truth, instead of dropping to his knees and confessing that he had physically shoved his own daughter into the shadows and ordered her to deny her own name, he reached for the only weapon a narcissist has left when cornered: the lie. This is just a misunderstanding by the event organizers, sir. Brenda, she likes the quiet. She isn't used to luxurious places. He delivered the line with the trembling earnestness of a man who genuinely believed his own fabrication. His hands spread wide, palms up, the universal gesture of innocence. He even managed a small sheepish chuckle, as if the entire situation were nothing more than an amusing logistical error. Before I could open my mouth, Colonel Mercer stepped forward. She moved with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had commanded thousands. Her trench coat shifted as she squared her shoulders, and the fabric rustled against her dress, a small, precise sound that somehow commanded more attention than a shout. She positioned herself directly between my father and the judge. Her silver hair caught the hallway light. Her gray eyes locked onto Carter's face with the unblinking focus of a combat veteran delivering a field report. With all due respect, Judge Carter, there is no misunderstanding here. This arrangement is a calculated move, a systematic humiliation. She reached into her coat pocket. Mercer pulled out my phone. She did not ask my permission. She did not glance at me for approval. She operated with the autonomous authority of a commander executing a pre-approved strike. She held the phone up at chest level, the screen facing Judge Carter, the brightness turned to maximum. The harsh white glare cut through the dim corridor light and reflected off Carter's glasses. She read the text message aloud. Her voice carried the cadence of a military briefing, clear, measured, and absolutely devoid of emotion. She recited every word my father had written exactly as it appeared on the screen. The crude military demeanor, the order to keep quiet, the command to sit at the back auxiliary table, the explicit instruction to deny being Daniel's sister, the final demand, don't ruin this family's effort. She read it the way a prosecutor reads an indictment, slowly, deliberately letting each phrase settle into the silence like a stone dropping into still water. Then she turned the phone around. She held the screen 6 inches from Judge Carter's face. My father's name and phone number glowed at the top of the message thread. The timestamp. The delivery confirmation. The digital fingerprints of a man who thought his cruelty would never leave the confines of a private text exchange. Carter leaned forward. He adjusted his glasses on his nose. He read the message himself, his lips moving slightly as his eyes tracked each line. When he finished, he straightened up. He removed his glasses, slowly folding them with the deliberate care of a man buying himself time to process something genuinely repulsive, and slipped them into his breast pocket. My dad snapped. The narcissist, cornered by reality, went rabid. The transformation was instantaneous. The fawning host dissolved, and in his place stood a snarling, desperate animal. He slammed his open palm against a nearby cocktail table. Glasses rattled. A champagne flute toppled and rolled off the edge, shattering against the oak floor. His face flushed crimson from his collar to his hairline. Spittle gathered at the corners of his mouth. He wheeled on me as his finger jabbing the air between us like a weapon. Enough. You brought this old woman here to destroy my family, didn't you, Brenda? You're jealous of your brother's success. Your honor, do not believe her. She's always been the failure of the family. She just wants attention. His voice cracked on the last word. It came out high and thin, the sound of a man who had run out of lies and was now burning through his last reserves of bluster. Daniel jumped in. He lurched forward from behind our father, his hands waving frantically in front of him like a man trying to flag down a rescue helicopter. His eyes darted between Emily Carter, who stood frozen near the center table, her hand pressed against her mouth, and the judge. He targeted my military service with the desperation of a drowning man grabbing at anything within reach. You see, Dad, she has psychological issues. She was in the military. She's obsessed. We just wanted to protect you from her eccentricity, Frezza. The words hung in the air. The room had gone completely silent. The string quartet had stopped playing. The waiters stood motionless with trays balanced on their palms. 50 guests stared at the spectacle unfolding near the service corridor. Daniel's chest heaved. His carefully styled hair had fallen across his forehead. His veneer of sophistication had crumbled, revealing the panicked, spineless opportunist underneath. Judge Carter raised a single hand, palm out, fingers extended. The gesture was small, but it carried the gravitational force of a federal bench. Daniel's mouth snapped shut mid-breath. The sound of his teeth clicking together was audible. Carter looked at my father, then at Daniel. He studied them the way a coroner studies a body on a table, clinical, thorough, and utterly without pity. He took a slow breath. Then he spoke. Eccentricity, psychological issues. The woman you are humiliating is the one who stayed up all night designing the evacuation routes that saved thousands of lives. And you sit here in your expensive suits and feel ashamed of your own bloodline. He paused. The silence pressed down on the room like a physical weight. My father opened his mouth. Carter did not let him fill it. A father who tramples on his daughter's dignity just to seek a few vain glances is an inhumane monster. The word monster landed like a mortar round. My father staggered backward half a step as if the word had physically struck him. Daniel grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady himself. His knuckles turned white. His Adam's apple bobbed a rapid convulsive swallow. I stood still. My hands were at my sides. My breathing held at 4-count intervals. I felt the vibration of every heartbeat in the room. The stunned guests, the frozen waiters, the string quartet players holding their bows in midair. I felt the heat of 50 pairs of eyes on my face, but I did not move. I did not speak. The evidence had spoken. The verdict had been delivered. The execution was underway, and it was not finished. Movement at the edge of my peripheral vision. Emily Carter stepped out from behind her father. She was pale, the kind of pale that comes not from fear, but from a fury so concentrated it drains the blood from every surface vessel in the body. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Daniel with the flat, dead gaze of a woman watching an illusion dissolve. I noticed something I had missed earlier in the evening, a detail that now made perfect sense. When the waiter had bumped my chair 2 hours ago, Emily had been watching from the main table. Her head had turned. She had seen the dark corner where I sat. She had seen the kitchen doors swinging behind me. She had registered it, filed it. And now, standing in the wreckage of her fiancé's lies, the filed detail clicked into place. She reached for her left hand. Her fingers found the diamond ring, a cushion-cut stone, $10,000 at minimum, mounted on a platinum band. She gripped it between her thumb and forefinger. Daniel saw the movement. His entire body lurched forward, his hands shaking his mouth, forming the word no before his brain could produce sound. Emily slid the ring off her finger. She held it at shoulder height for 1 full second. Then she dropped it onto the glass surface of the cocktail table beside her. The sound was deafening. A sharp, crystalline crack, the ring striking tempered glass that cut through the silence of the ballroom like a gunshot. Every head in the room flinched. The ring bounced once, wobbled on its band, and settled face up. The diamond caught the chandelier light and threw a fractured rainbow across the white tablecloth. Emily leveled her gaze at Daniel. Her voice came out steady, controlled, and saturated with a disgust so pure it felt like a physical substance in the air. Don't touch me. You didn't just lie to me. You and your family are hollow, disgustingly fake people. If you can hide and ruthlessly humiliate your own biological sister like this, one day you'll do the same to me. Daniel's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees on the polished oak floor. The impact produced a dull thud that echoed through the silent room. He crawled forward on his hands and knees toward Judge Carter, his fingers clawing at the fabric of the judge's jacket. Tears streamed down his face. Mucus ran from his nose. The golden boy, the polished heir, the masterpiece of the Martin family, reduced to a sobbing wreck on a banquet hall floor. No, Dad. Please say something for me. Carter stepped back. He disengaged Daniel's fingers from his jacket with a single precise motion, the way you would remove a leech. He turned his back entirely on my brother. He looked down at the crumpled figure on the floor, then across the room at the frozen crowd. His voice carried the weight of every judgment he had ever delivered from the federal bench. I do not hand my daughter over to shameless people. This marriage is canceled. My dad stood frozen. His mouth hung open. His hands dangled at his sides, the Rolex catching the light one final time. His entire fake empire, the social climbing, the country club memberships, the rehearsed laughter, the hidden daughter, the groomed son turned to ash in the span of 30 seconds. The guests stared. The whispers had not yet started. The room existed in that terrible suspended moment between the explosion and the shockwave. Then, in a final act of pathetic cowardice, my dad turned on me. His face contorted. His upper lip curled back from his teeth. He pointed at me with a trembling finger, and the last shred of his composure disintegrated into a snarl. It's all your fault, you're a jinx. I stepped forward. One step, deliberate, measured, closing the distance between us to less than 3 feet. He flinched. His body jerked backward, his heel catching on the carpet runner, his shoulder blades pressing against the edge of a table. He was cornered, physically, emotionally, strategically. I looked him dead in the eyes. I held his gaze the way I held the crosshairs of a scope-steady patient and absolute. My voice came out low, not a whisper, not a shout. The precise, lethal volume of a tactical command issued in a combat operations center. You pulled the trigger, Mr. Martin. I simply refused to take the bullet for you. I held his eyes for 3 more seconds. His mouth moved. No sound came out. His chest heaved with shallow, rapid breaths. The veins in his neck stood out like cables. I watched the exact moment the fight left his body, a barely perceptible sagging of the shoulders, a softening of the jaw. The dull glaze that settled over his pupils when a person realizes they have lost everything and there is no one left to blame but themselves. I turned my back. I looked at Mercer. She was already standing, her trench coat buttoned her chin level. She had watched the entire demolition with the calm detachment of a demolitions expert observing a controlled implosion, every charge detonating exactly where it was placed, every wall falling in the predicted sequence. She met my eyes. A single slow nod passed between us. I gave the order. Mission accomplished, Colonel. We are pulling out. The corner of her mouth lifted, not a smile exactly, but the faint acknowledgement of a job completed by the book. She fell in at my left flank, half a step behind, matching my stride with the unconscious precision of 1,000 shared patrols. We walked out through the main doors of the Union Harbor Club, not through the service corridor, not through the kitchen, not past the ice buckets and the bread baskets and the swinging doors that had blown cold air on my bare shoulders all evening. We walked through the center of the ballroom, between the round tables draped in white linen, past the silent string quartet, past the frozen waiters holding silver trays, past 50 guests who parted for us the way water parts for the hull of a warship. I heard the whispers begin as we crossed the threshold, low buzzing murmurs rippling outward from the epicenter of the detonation. Someone near the bar said the word, Major. Someone else said, Sister. A woman in a green dress pressed her hand to her chest and shook her head. The whisper network of high society had received the transmission, and it was already replicating. By tomorrow morning, every country club, every charity board, and every social register in the tri-state area would carry the story of the Martin family's public execution. I did not look back. The night air hit my face the moment I stepped through the front doors. Cool. Clean. Carrying the faint salt tang of the harbor 2 blocks away. I inhaled through my nose and let the breath fill my lungs completely. The first unrestricted breath I had taken in 6 hours. The tension that had been coiled around my ribcage like a steel band loosened. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just a slow measured release, the way a hydraulic press eases off a compressed surface. Mercer walked beside me across the parking lot. Our heels clicked against the asphalt in synchronized rhythm. Neither of us spoke until we reached her car, a 10-year-old dark blue sedan, clean but unassuming the vehicle of a woman who measured worth in reliability rather than appearance. She unlocked the doors. I slid into the passenger seat. She started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed a soft green. She pulled out of the lot without looking back at the club. In the rearview mirror, I could see a cluster of guests spilling out of the front entrance, their phones already raised, their mouths still moving. We drove in silence for 3 full minutes. The city lights slid past the windows in blurred streaks of amber and white. Then, Mercer spoke, her eyes fixed on the road. That was the cleanest operation I've seen in 20 years, and I've seen a few. I pressed 2 fingers to my wrist. Pulse 58 beats per minute, lower than baseline. The adrenaline was metabolizing. The operational high was fading, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in a very long time, the quiet, bone-deep exhaustion that follows not from physical labor, but from finally setting down a weight you've been carrying so long you forgot it was there. I closed my eyes. I let the hum of the engine fill the silence. The seatbelt pressed against my collarbone. My elbow still ached where my father had grabbed me. I suspected it would ache for a few more days, and then it wouldn't. Some bruises heal faster when you stop returning to the person who inflicted them. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout hit with the slow grinding inevitability of an artillery barrage walking across a fixed position. I learned the details not because I sought them out, but because they arrived uninvited. Sergeant First Class Riveri, my logistics. CO. A woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of social networks and zero tolerance for liars, forwarded me a single email on the Tuesday after the party. It was from a law firm in the business district. The subject line read, Partnership Dissolution, Martin and Associates. The body of the email was a cold clinical notification that 3 of my father's 4 remaining business partners had voted to sever their professional affiliation with the Martin name, citing irreconcilable concerns regarding character and professional integrity. 3 of 4. The 4th partner, an elderly real estate broker who had played golf with my dad for 15 years, called my dad personally to deliver the news that he too was out. Rivera told me the broker's exact words, I can't have my name next to a man who hides his own daughter at a party to impress someone he's not worthy of impressing. Daniel's situation collapsed in parallel. His position at the prestigious law firm downtown, a position my father had pulled every string and called in every favor to secure, evaporated within 10 days of the party. He was not fired. The managing partner was more surgical than that. Daniel was simply removed from all active cases, relocated to an interior office with no window, and informed that his mentorship period was being reevaluated pending further review. He resigned 3 days later. The resignation letter, according to a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same building, was 1 paragraph long and contained 2 spelling errors. The Martin family reputation, the carefully constructed decades in the making facade of wealth, sophistication, and elite standing, did not collapse. Collapse implies a sudden event, a single dramatic failure. What happened to the Martin name was slower and more thorough. It rotted. The invitations stopped arriving. The phone calls went unreturned. The reserved table at the country club sat empty week after week until the manager quietly reassigned it. High society did not shun my father with any particular malice. It simply forgot he existed, which was for a narcissist who lived and breathed for social attention, a fate far worse than public humiliation. My phone blew up. It started the morning after the party. 17 missed calls before I finished my first cup of coffee at the base. By the end of the week, the count had climbed past 100. The voicemails were a masterclass in narcissistic escalation. The first few were curt and demanding. Call me back immediately. Brenda, we need to discuss what happened. The middle batch escalated to guilt-laden manipulation. Your mother would be ashamed of how you behaved. And the final wave bottomed out into the one tactic my father had left groveling. The text messages were worse. They arrived at all hours. 3 a.m., noon, midnight, a barrage of digital desperation fired from a man watching his empire disintegrate in real time. The tone pulled a complete 180. The man who had gripped my elbow and hissed at me to know my place was now typing with trembling thumbs. You are my pride. Forgive the family's foolishness. We need to unite to overcome this period. I read that message once. I read it slowly the way I would read an intelligence report flagged as disinformation. I parsed every word. You are my pride, a lie. I was his pride now because I was connected to power he needed. Forgive the family's foolishness, a deflection. He called systematic humiliation foolishness the way an arsonist calls a house fire a small accident. We need to unite, the final manipulation. He didn't want unity. He wanted a life raft. He wanted the daughter he had shoved into the shadows to now step into the spotlight and use her connections to drag his drowning reputation back to the surface. They didn't want me. They wanted what I could do for them. The distinction was the difference between love and exploitation, and it had taken me 37 years to stop confusing the two. I opened my contacts. I scrolled to my father's name. My thumb hovered over the screen for 2 seconds. Then I pressed block contact. The screen flashed a confirmation. I pressed it again for Daniel's number. Another flash. I set the phone face down on my desk. The surface was cold, smooth steel. The silence that followed was not empty. It was architectural and the sound of a bridge being permanently decommissioned. Every bolt removed, every cable cut, the structure lowered into the water with deliberate, irreversible finality. I never called back. I never responded. I never explained. Some people don't deserve an explanation. They deserve a dial tone. 1 month later, I was standing in the main hall of Fort Hamilton in my full dress uniform. The wool blend was pressed and starched to regulation crispness. The ribbon rack on my chest caught the overhead light, each bar a compressed record of a deployment, a commendation, a mission completed under conditions that would break most people who had never worn the uniform. My shoes were polished to a mirror finish. The crease in my trousers could cut paper. The base commander stood at the lectern, his ribbons catching the overhead light. Behind him, the American flag hung motionless against the wood-paneled wall. The room smelled of floor wax and starched cotton, the clean, honest smell of a place where rank was earned, not purchased. To my left, Colonel Mercer stood in civilian clothes, a dark blazer, her silver hair down for the first time I could remember. She watched the ceremony with the quiet satisfaction of a mentor witnessing the culmination of a decades-long investment. The commander read the promotion order. I stepped forward. He pinned the silver oak leaf cluster to my shoulder. The metal was cold against the fabric for exactly 1 second before my body heat warmed it. Lieutenant Colonel Brenda Martin. I looked down at the insignia. The oak leaf cluster caught the fluorescent light and held it a small hard point of silver against the dark green of my uniform. I thought about the kitchen in my parents' house, the pine sol, and the grease, the dirty dishes in the sink. My father's voice through the closed door, just the cleaning lady. I thought about the dark corner at the Union Harbor Club, the ice buckets, the cold draft from the kitchen doors, the waiter who bumped my chair without seeing me. I thought about all the rooms I'd been hidden in, all the tables I'd been shoved toward, all the names I'd been told not to claim. And then I stopped thinking about them. Not with effort, not with willpower. The thoughts simply lost their weight the way a satellite loses signal as it drifts beyond the range of a dead transmitter. The signal faded. The frequency went silent. And what remained was not anger, not sadness, not even satisfaction. It was clarity. The greatest revenge is not screaming. It is not fighting. It is not cornering a narcissist at his own party and watching him choke on the truth. Those things are necessary. They are the surgery that removes the tumor. But the revenge that endures, the revenge that compounds daily and pays dividends for the rest of your life, is simpler and quieter than any confrontation. It is standing in the light of your own truth. It is letting the traitors sit in the dark. And it is letting the world decide who actually holds value. I looked at Mercer. She gave me a single nod. The same nod she gave me in Fallujah after pulling me from the rubble, her shoulder dislocated, her face covered in concrete dust. The nod that said, "You made it. You're still here. Now move forward." I straightened my shoulders. I squared my jaw. I let the silver oak leaf settle into its permanent position on my uniform. Outside the window, the morning light was breaking across the parade ground, long and clean and golden, casting the kind of shadows that only fall in one direction: forward. Forgiveness doesn't mean giving toxic people a second chance to shoot you. It means walking away and building an empire they are never allowed to enter. If you believe that true strength is built in silence, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your own moments of walking away in the comments below, and let's honor the warriors who survive the hardest battles at home.